In the previous 4 videos we did, we covered basically how to set up and train for our own personal self-defense. But what happens when those tactics fail or can't be used in certain situations? Stay tuned, we'll talk about it. Welcome to Shihan's Dojo. I'm Shihan Marty Husband, and I'm here today to help you build your martial arts skills and knowledge. This will be the stopping point in this part of the video series, and we truly hope it helps you create your own personal tactics for your own self-defense and that. We basically want to cover here what we want to do when our tactics fail or our technique doesn't work in a certain situation. But before we get started, if you haven't seen the first 4 videos in the series and you'd like to see where we're coming from, go up here and check them out. I'll leave a link up there so you can see them if you'd like and come back here when you're done. Otherwise, let's get started. In this video, we will use the front choke to basically break down our tactics that we want to apply to it. Now, before we even get started on this, if you're training with a partner and you're trying to do a choke or defense against a choke, please take precautions in learning how to choke somebody properly when training. You can easily hurt your partner if you don't know what you're doing. And if you're a beginner, by all means, find somebody who really knows what they're doing to help you out in this type of a situation. Your partner themselves will have to learn how to choke you and give you resistance without shutting your airways off and all of that, so you can have a better feel of what the techniques work like realistically with that choke. For the first tactic I'm going to use, I basically pulled it from a kata. I'll show you right here. And in doing that, I understood basically how I could see it being handled in a choke situation. Even though this has a high efficiency and success in being able to be used against this type of tactic, there are still problems and things we're going to have to discuss, as we can see here in a few minutes. In most instances, if I was to allow a choke to happen like that, I would think of myself as very dumb. But we have to consider this as a realistic possibility, because sometimes attacks are so vicious and quick, it'll surprise even the best people in the world. And please remember, safety is always paramount in trying to do this setup and tactic so you don't hurt yourself or your partner. Keep in mind, there is no safety on the street, and if you don't know how to defend against this type of a technique, it could lead to death. Also, in doing this first type of tactic, if you're not careful, you can actually break your partner's wrist by twisting the way we're going to do it here. So keep that in mind when you're doing it so you don't hurt your partner as well as yourself. Now, as you can see here, my partner's coming forth from a distance to come out, grab, and choke me. Since I see that choke coming, I'll pretend like I was surprised by it somehow, and still use the bunkai from that kata that I was doing earlier. This will help me see what it feels like once he grabs me, and I'm able to work through this type of a self-defense situation. In reality, this will work with people who are your same size as you, or maybe just a tad bit bigger than you, and smaller than you if they're ever trying to choke you. The one thing you might have to do in this type of a situation is to test it out with somebody who's much bigger on a different scale than you, maybe by 10, 15, 20 pounds more, even more than that if you can. In reality, this is just a highly efficient technique, and it will usually work for most people. Now remember what I said about these techniques. They don't always work 100% of the time, and especially not for everybody. Just because something works for me, it may not work for you out there. But I'm using this only as an example for you guys to understand what's going on. Please keep that in mind. As you can see in this next part of the video, I'm trying to have my partner pull me in a little closer to see how effective it is from a closer range to the partner in order to establish whether I can still use my footwork to get out of that pattern. As you can see here, it's still quite efficient, and there's a high probability of it working even in this type of a situation. Now, when you're looking at this one, he's pulling me in real close, almost to what I call a grappling range, where our bodies are nearly touching together. Don't mind my face there. He was really pulling hard to really let me test to see if this was going to work. As we can see in comparison to the other 2 times, it does work efficiently at this point and effective in being used in this manner. In keeping with the ideas we're trying to accomplish here, the next part of it is we have to go to the ground. There we have our partner sit on top of us and then come in to choke us from that standpoint. Using the tactic I'd been using, I already knew in reality it wasn't going to work, so I'm testing it here for the purpose of showing there's really no way I can use it, bridging or otherwise. When you're trying to find the one technique that takes care of all of your self-defense needs, you'll find sometimes that it's not always the case, as this is going to show here. I can't simply twist out and be behind my partner, and it doesn't provide me with the leverage I need by laying on the ground. So in this instance, that technique fails, only at that point, but it still fails. Now you have a realization that you cannot use this technique as a single unit for training because of its failure on the ground. Since we now know that this technique fails on the ground, we have to go back to what our secondary technique would have been when we did our examination phase of where we wanted to go with our tactics in self-defense. Remember, I said in the previous videos that you should always write down a secondary tactic in case the one you're working with does not always work in all situations. In this instance, I'm using basically a lever action to pull my partner into an arm bar using his own arm. In reality, it would probably throw him or snap his arm to get away from him. In using this technique, even though I don't have another partner here, if that person is stronger than you, sometimes this leverage does not always work in this type of a situation. It still has a high efficiency rating. However, it does have its limitations. Now that we're trying to use this, we start trying to use it at all different levels like we did earlier. Partners coming in from a distance to choke you, and how you might use the lever action to control them and take them down at that point. This is also very difficult in a lot of ways for beginners to learn because there's a little bit more complex action in this, and so beginners might have a difficulty in trying to remember this when they're being choked. That's why I always think of try to use the simplest stuff you can use in order to get out of a choke or how you can best do it. So for the instructor, we have to make sure we can take care of our students by teaching them something simple at first and then giving them a secondary technique for later. As you can see here with the next two videos, my partner's pulling me in real close like he did in the first one. This will allow me to see how much I need to do in order to continue to use this technique. In doing it, I realized there was a lot of strength and leverage that I had to put into it when he brought him into a grappling range on a standing action there. There really isn't a lot of footwork in this instance until you get the arms off of you. However, you have to consider also that this type of a situation, again, if a bigger person was there, you might not be able to get in between their arms to do this. This doesn't mean it's not effective in being able to be used, but it's not highly effective with all opponents that you might attack you. But the fact of the matter is, here's where the next part of that tactic actually shines when you're on the ground. Barring certain things that you would find on the ground or doing in ground fighting, you can see here that this is one of the more effective ways to get somebody off you that is choking you in this type of a situation. The simple realization here is now the lever becomes effective because we are on our back and we actually have stability there in order to be using it against the opponent. Again, it's going to be on how the opponent is actually trying to choke you. He might come in close and then you've got a different problem here. But we're using it just from a standing point that they're not bending their arms too much and have a full straight on choke on you. Now with this, we know we can bridge our hips, we can actually control and do kind of a throw or a toss to take our partner off us. It ain't pretty, but it does work. Always make sure you test this a second time if it succeeds, because there's always a chance that you were lucky or the partner themselves might not have had a full grip or strength on you before you took off on the technique. Sometimes your tactics work just on accident, but this accident sometimes may be able to teach you something on how to better handle those situations. Now that we know this tactic works on the ground and sometimes standing, we can better implement this into our own training systems and coordinate that training by picking out which one's primary or secondary, or possibly just making them both primary and train them every time you have this type of self-defense situation. It sounds like common sense out there to most people, but when you're being choked, you can panic. There's a lot of problems when somebody's on top of you or strangling you. You don't have time for a lot of thought. So if you have to think about these type of situations, you haven't trained them enough. You need to practice these techniques thousands of times to make sure it's a part of your muscle memory and your repertoire. That way, if the incident does happen, you're able to do it without any thinking, if at all possible. Don't forget, when you go back and review your list of what you did, make sure you make notes to each of these sections on why it failed and how it failed, so you might address them later on as you go up in rank and see similar or simpler ways of handling the self-defense you might be doing. I can't stress enough that if you're teaching students, be aware of their size and the possibilities of how those techniques might not work for them. This can include anything from size to range, somebody just being bigger than them, or just absolute panic because they don't understand, or they don't truly understand what to do in that type of a situation. Now, I hope these first 5 videos have been of some help for you, and in the future we'll plan to do more videos from this standpoint. We want to try to eventually start covering different aspects of the HAP-V and seeing how we might modify them a little bit in order to sustain what we have to deal with today for self-defense in modern times. Hap V in and of itself has some very good ideals on how to defend yourself, but I think there should be many additions that should be added to it in this day and age. Modernizing the Hap V is kind of the goal I have for myself. I'm hoping to set it up for a future thesis on my own black belt test when I come up. So you guys will be along for the ride for this thesis test. Now if you like this video, press like down there and tell your friends about Shihan's Dojo. We'd like to see Shihan's Dojo grow. If you have comments, leave them down there at the bottom and we'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. Good luck in your training, and we hope to see you here again on Shihan's Dojo.